I have the table saw set up to cut the rabbets for the backs with the addition of a hold-down clamp to the fence. The clamp is needed because the wider cut increases the likelihood of the board rising up off the table. I am reviewing the print to make sure all is okay so I can make parts, not scrap. This rabbet is the same depth as the bottom dados, so it was not necessary to change the height of the blade. I had already performed the first test cut and now validating the width is good. I run a sanding block across the dado so that there are no splinters that may get caught on the table. I apologize again for the great view of my back. I will endeavor to have better camera angles on future projects, but I am sure this will be a common event throughout this project. When cutting rabbets, I have the blades set just off the fence, so I have my sanding block handy to remove the slight lip it leaves. In a close-up of the fence, you can see where I did not have the gap set properly in the past and left a scar on the fence. After the first board is cut, I again inspect for the correct width of cut before machining all of the back. Better one error now than messing up all of the boards. When watching this for the first time, I noticed my hands getting dangerously close to the blade when running the sanding block across the previously cut dado. Even though I know I survived without losing any fingers, I still grit my teeth while watching. This was one of the repair boards that still had some of the repair projecting beyond the end of the board and has to be sanded before cutting the rabbet. Now all done with the backs, and now to set up for the rabbets on the faces. Here's that close-up I was promising of the height gauge while setting up for a deeper rabbet on the faces. To zero the gauge, you put it on the table and push the slider all the way down, then press the Hold to Zero button. After it is zeroed, set it over the blade so it contacts a tooth at its highest point. The face rabbet will be a 3/8 deep cut. As I slowly raise the blade, watch the right side of the display as it shows the fractional measurement as I move through it. Once I have the height set to 3/8, I again confirmed the gauge is properly zeroed. Now set up for the face rabbet, and this was my test cut. The width is wider than dado blade, so it will require 2 passes. Checking my print to validate the setting against the lines drawn on the board. Cutting all the inner passes first, and then we'll go back and trim off the rest. On the second cut of the third face, I came across another problem that is in need of repair. Putting it against the fence, I noticed the edge was not straight as though the saw moved while cutting. After inspecting, I found one end deviated by about 1/4 inch. It was not totally out of square, but confirms the saw moved a bit after the cut was started. I will put this board aside for now and think about it after finishing the rest of the boards. Now back to the problem. After thinking about it for a bit, it looks like I can finish this cut as long as I am careful and don't allow it to rock on the fence. This way I don't have to worry about duplicating the setup to cut another board. After a little head scratching, I decided I will attempt to glue a board to the edge and then trim to size. Not a big concern since this will be a painted cabinet. In my cut-off and remnants pile was a piece left over after ripping a 2x4. It is thin enough that it will conform to the warped edge, and after cutting to length a bit longer than needed and sanding the side to be glued, I'm sure it will be perfect. Now ready to glue it up using a couple of old-fashioned bar clamps. I have my glue bottle in hot water so it will flow easily. The repair strip is longer and wider than the face and will be trimmed to fit after the glue is cured. I have these plastic spacers I made on my 3D printer to keep the boards up off of the bars. They snap onto the pipe with one at each end. When gluing panels, there are 4 more along the glue joint, keeping everything in the same plane. In this case, they allow the edge of the repair strip to project below the face and will be trimmed flush after the glue is cured. A thin layer of glue, spraying the mating edge with water, and lightly clamp and wait till it cures. I used more clamps than necessary just because. One of these days I may show how I make 2 bar clamps act like 3 because sometimes there are just not enough clamps available. Now it is time to take a break. The glue is cured and ready to trim. This side of the interface will be cut off as part of the rabbet, so the quality of this trim is not important. I will use my oscillating tool plus a little sanding so that it is flat with the face to recut on the crosscut sled. When inspecting the joint, there should be expanded squeeze out along the entire length. Any missing expanded foam means not enough glue was applied. I am rough trimming with the oscillating cutter so that the face is flat, allowing me to recut the length on the crosscut sled. A little sanding and it will be ready. The inner face, leading and trailing edges are trimmed and a stop clamped on the saw by using one of the other boards as a gauge. First checking the blade height, then running it through. Now it is plain and easy to see the extent that the saw wandered during this cut. Now to finish the trimming of this repair and cutting the rabbets. Then I will be moving on to pre-assembly of the drawers. I never did figure out how this error occurred. During pre-assembly, I ponder how I am going to set things up to easily put the 6 drawers together. I have various clamps ready, a construction square and a clamping square. During this first process, I am thinking how I can set this up so that it goes together as fast and easily as possible. Also at this point, there is a final trim to be made to the bottoms for a perfect fit. I always cut them a bit oversized since I find it is easier to cut something smaller than it is to cut it larger. There can be multiple variances in the cuts that can affect the final dimensions for the bottoms. Tapping to get the side slots lined up with the face so that the bottom slides into the face dado. No force should be required to slide the bottom into place. Now that it's in place, I check the gaps on each side to the face, showing me how much needs to be trimmed. And now that I know this dimension, I can trim all the bottoms to the same width. I have the bottoms trimmed to width and now checking for the correct length to the back. Using essentially the same process and measuring the gap to be trimmed, then trimming that length off the bottom. Now checking that everything is still square, and when happy I will trim the rest of the bottoms to the final dimensions. Before I assemble the drawers, I will need to drill the holes for the drawer slides and knobs, but the slides have not yet arrived. Drilling these holes is much easier before the drawers are assembled. The drawer slides arrived, and it is a good thing I waited because the mounting dimensions I copied from the slide documentation was not quite right and my original marks did not line up with the slides. This resulted in another visit to my design model, and now they are where they should be. The slide documentation is in millimeters, but I don't have a metric tape measure, so one side of my print is in inches and the other is in millimeters. You would be surprised on how difficult it is to find a metric tape measure in the United States. I drilled 2 sets of mounting holes on each side so that the sides can be assembled on either the left or right side of the drawer, avoiding any assembly errors. In addition, I have the left and right drawer slides offset 1/2 inch because the drawers are mounted next to each other with only an 18 millimeter thick board. If they were not offset, then the mounting screws would run into each other on adjacent drawers. I will carefully mark and drill one side, then use that side as a drill template to drill the rest of the boards. I have the side drilled and I am validating the hole locations are correct using the slide from the slider assembly. When making a template, you must be sure it is correct before you end up making a lot of rework. All holes are correct with the front end of the slider flush with the end of the board. Rotating the slide to the other end shows how the board can be assembled as either a left or right side of the drawer. I started drilling the slide holes like this only after one time assembling a drawer incorrectly, resulting in having to drill holes after the drawer was assembled. I have one more operation to do before getting to the drawer assembly. After reviewing, I decided to make a modification to the faces. The plywood at the top of the face would be subject to splintering, and it is in an area that could be exposed to hands. I am tired of yanking wood splinters out of my fingers. I will be edge gluing some solid trim to the exposed end. The strip I have for the edge is the same thickness as the board, so I need to make sure everything stays lined up. I wrapped clear boxing tape around some scraps to clamp to the faces and keep everything lined up. I am not aware of any adhesive that sticks to the boxing tape. I also put a piece of tape on the bar that is under the joint so it is easier to clean up. I have a wider backup board to keep even pressure across the joint. This will ensure the strip stays flat on the edge. I sandwiched the trim piece between the two boards. I applied the glue to the board off camera since it was easier when clamped vertically in a vise and I didn't want to move the camera around. I spray the piece to be glued with some water and clamp it, being sure the two ends are flush with the face. Then clamp the alignment blocks in the middle and add more bar clamps. I use a flush cut pull saw to trim the ends and rabbets. The set of the teeth only goes to one side of the blade, so holding the opposite side flush with the piece being cut leaves a smooth surface. This tool has been very useful. After trimming, just need a minor touch-up with my block sander. Back on the table saw to trim the face height back to the design dimensions. Double checking with the print and the setting on the fence to ensure I have the right height per the design. Then checking measurements to be sure what it is supposed to be. The only thing left now is just a bit of finishing. Using my 90-degree edge sander I put together many years ago to keep the edges perpendicular. The sandpaper is held in place with a couple of screws into thread inserts. This one was made long before I had the 3D printer. Once I am happy with the edge surface, I grab my block plane and eyeball a 45-degree angle, then finish with my 3D printed 45-degree edge sander for a perfect edge. I was pleased with the edge, so I completed the other 5 faces using the same procedures. Next up, part 4, assembling the drawers.